Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and today's episode is courtesy of Ms. Lori Osborne. She's not sponsoring this episode. I mean, she's free to send me money for it if she wants, but what I mean by that is she connected me with today's guest quite a while ago, and we are not, because of my fault, of having thousands of emails. I need a VA. I have thousands of emails coming in, filtering through all of them. We've all been there, but luckily, today's guest was very understanding, and we're connecting now, and we're going to have a great conversation about a whole slew of different topics. We're going to address a lot of interconnected topics, so to speak, with a big focus on emotions. There's so many conversations that can be had around that topic alone, so we're going to get into that. Ms. Tricia, so great to have you here. Glad to have you here and excited to get into it with you. So, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Wow. Thank you. First of all, first and foremost, right? Like Lori, thank you. I'm an amazing friend, a great professional to have on your side. But just years of her, and she's just great. I'm gracious to her for making this connection. And I'm really excited about our conversation today. But yes, I'm Tricia Parido, and I have been in and around the online personal coaching, I guess, personal lifestyle coaching space for about 13 years. So before it was the designer thing to do, right? When the pandemic came and everybody went online, I, was already doing online coaching all across the US into Canada. So I am an international master addiction specialist, along with, I don't know, 14 other titles or credentials, which are neither here nor there. I am an emotional performance strategist. And what that means, right, for those that are listening, is that I coach my clients in the direction of being able to experience living in a state of emotional agility, meaning we can sit in and move through anything and everything, right? The big hard stuff as almost as easily as other things, and really allow ourselves to experience living versus trying to cope through it, right? We'll talk about coping, I'm sure,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Instead of trying to cope through it or avoid or control, right? Just sit in and move through it and have it still have you leading in the direction that you want to see yourself going. Anyway, that's the short version.
Right. And we can definitely get into coping as someone who works in addiction recovery, right? Obviously, a lot of the side of addiction is coping. The other major half that I have found is societal pressure, and that's a conversation on its own. But I want to start kind of with your childhood and upbringing in terms of your relationship with emotions, focusing on that area, kind of. When do you feel like you got in touch with your emotions to the degree that you can then help other people, live with their emotions and process them properly?
Hmm. There's not a single answer to that. So I came out of the womb literally, I think, a perfectionist. I don't know. I was reading, writing, doing arithmetic, playing chess, swimming, whatever, right? By the age of 4. And started playing classical piano at 5.5. And I was a competitive swimmer before I was 7. And just always that way. And always trying to think to catch up to my siblings who were considerably older than I was. The closest one to age was 7 years older. And
Wow.
so just
Right.
trying to find that space in the familial unit. And so I remember a lot of times, right, like marching down the hallway as this 4 or 5-year-old little girl multiple times a day, saying out loud, nobody loves me. And I think it was my interpretation of the older people in my environment pushing me off, right? Like, and they weren't doing anything wrong, but that was the way my brain translated it. And and so from an early age, I felt that nobody loves me. I'm going to go isolate myself and quietly, secretly hope that somebody comes to get me and tell me that they do. Right. And without knowing how to articulate that that's what I needed in that moment, was to be seen and to be heard, and to be included, not to be pushed off. Again, I don't think that my siblings or any of the other people, older people in my life were necessarily doing anything wrong or trying to be harmful. It was just my translation. And I'm, considerably older than you are. I'm 55, as we sit here today. And so looking back at these things, if you would have asked me this 20 years ago, I probably would have had a different answer about my siblings than I do now.
Mm.
Right. So looking back so that kind of stuff transpired throughout my life. I remember, being told nobody wants to hear what you have to say. Again, by the time I was in sixth grade, I was, through 10th grade work. So I was, in advanced education at an early age. And so I could hold my own in conversations. And so, nobody wants to hear what you have to say was something that I translated, in a harmful way. It wasn't meant that, right? It was like more of a don't correct your elders. And my grandmother and my great grandmother, both very staunch German women. And so it was more of a, know your lane and not again to be meaning of any harm. So, I started becoming aware of emotions that of not feeling seen, heard, valued, or valid. And it was hard for me. But then you go to school and I felt very heard and very seen. And so I had the flip side there. And so that was really cool. And I had an innate ability to be very supportive with, with my peers. And I really enjoyed that. But that led to people pleasing codependency. Yeah. And so there was the perfectionism, there was the isolation, there was the lowering self-esteem at the same time, having elevated esteem in other areas, and becoming very attached to that, and then therefore not wanting to always wanting to be gone, always wanting to be in those other environments, the escapism. And so just this whole thing. Yeah, I mean, long life. So we could sit here in a lot of different seasons, and we can talk about, when I found coping, right? Coping was a big deal. I learned, say, my first recovery journey was anorexia, but also I learned to cope with alcohol at the age of 12 and when my father was killed. So there was, adolescence was very tricky, to say the least. Yeah.
Right. You talk about the look back. You're saying at your age, you're able to look back and view things differently. But I think part of the amazing factor around conversations like these, whether it's podcasting or just in mentorship, coaching, whatever it may be, is that we give that look back to people where they presently are almost as a look forward and as a we use our reflection as prevention. And I think that's really powerful. I think it's so important for young people to be educated. I say one of the issues is there are so many great books and resources and podcasts out there, but people don't know they exist or they're not seeking them out. And so I know what I talk about when it comes to parenting and mentorship is putting an intellectual curiosity into your children or your whoever you're mentoring, getting them to want to be self-researchers. And I think in a day and age of AI and fake news and all these different things and information overload, there's so much information online, not all true. Being self-independent researcher is extremely important. I mean that in the sense of fact checking stuff, going out of your way to look into different books and resources and so many people will make the excuse, I don't have time for this, but you can make the time and it's not that difficult. Even if you're just reading a few pages a day, or maybe you just have a daily science article that you look up or a daily news article or whatever it may be. I used to study 6 to 8 hours of sermons through audio consumption while multitasking. And I know some people will talk about the effectiveness going down when you're multitasking, but I think you can always, for me, I would listen to some of them multiple times, and sometimes it depends on the task and I coordinate it accordingly, things that require
That's
more
some
attention.
really, yeah, you've said some really critical things, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm gonna, because I think it's important, right? You're speaking to the people that are looking forward. And so when you're talking about learning and researching, right? We want to learn about ourselves. We're all unique individual beings. So
Hmm.
how I experience something isn't how somebody else is. And so, I always encourage my younger clients, like when you hear those words coming in, right? Like that's the external noise, whatever you want to call it, right? Like that external stimuli, when that's coming in, and if you don't like how you're translating it or how it feels in
Hmm.
your heart, in your soul, in your body, in your mind, you have to call out how it's affecting you, the individual person. Is spend time investigating that. Like, why? And then having that ability to just even articulate, like it's so freeing to be able to say, like, huh, did you mean for that to sound so hurtful? Right. And because you ask that question and the other person may have no idea. Or can you help me understand what you fully mean there? Because
100%.
what I heard is that you don't want to hear me, right? Like that might be whatever, right? Like what I think and feel isn't important to you. And that's what I feel. So when we learn to articulate that in the moment without the emotional overload, without if we can learn how to regulate our nervous system and see it coming in and go, okay, this feels uncomfortable. I'd like to pause here and do a little exchange so that, right, like I don't internalize, get frustrated, and now the first person yelling and back and forth. Like
Right.
this is how we learn about ourselves, so we know like how I hear this is my responsibility. How I experience it is my responsibility. What they think and feel is theirs. And what we do with it
Hmm.
together is the collaboration. But also, like learning. Like this hurts my nervous system. I mean, I've spent enough time getting to know myself that I actually removed 4 autoimmune diseases from my body just by learning how to hear what my physical body was telling me,
Right.
and being able to identify what were those prompting elements in my life. And when I removed them and it started dissipating, and I kept removing and dissipating and moving, I don't have rheumatoid arthritis anymore, which is amazing. And I didn't do it, and it wasn't medication assisted. It was me getting to know my body and making the adjustments it was telling me to make.
100%. I've had plenty of episodes dedicated to listening to our bodies because they do communicate with us, and sometimes we don't listen. I think questions are so vital for relationships, for even we look at politics right now. The huge division is just because of polarization. It's you're wrong, I'm right. Those are the conversations being had. And what I think some people have done publicly and what you should do in your own life is that question of I'm curious, why do you feel that way or why do you think that? I think, it shows less selfishness. It shows that active listening, wanting to know, and it's the same thing with relationships. Like you said, not everything that we hear was said the way that we heard it. And it's, hey, how did you mean that? I think what's so important is also sometimes it's not what you say, but how you say it, and sometimes how we hear it too. And so I think it's important. I think a great example is, being in a relationship and you say, okay, I know they're not saying it that way. So why am I still feeling this way? Or why am I taking it that way? Because now there's some kind of insecurity that I have that is actually being triggered, and it has nothing to do with what they're saying. So I think questions, like you said, are so great for self-discovery and, you know, bringing unity in conversation. I think questions lead the way to communication and conversation, and there's a lot of telling. In fact, I was actually on a call this morning for an hour and a half where we were talking about when children act a certain way or the behavior shifts, that questions are vital for understanding that because what most people jump to is, hey, you're wrong, you're being punished. I'll give you an example. If a student starts having a shift in their grades toward the negative side, they're starting to fail their classes or something. A lot of people would just jump to blame, like, you need to study more, you're slacking off, you're lazy, whatever it is, instead of, hey, what's going on with your grades? Is there some kind of external factor affecting you? But so many people want to blame the person rather than look at environmental factors. They make them the issue. And I think judgment before questions leads to children not wanting to tell their parents. It's like, well, why don't you tell me anything? Because every time I go to you, you react harshly. You don't ask further questions. You just instantly condemn or, whatever it is. So I think it really is so important to have questions. And I think it's also just as important to not let our emotions overrun our ability to ask questions because when you're angry the last things you want to do is understand someone else's side of the story and ask them questions, but I think it's so important, and I think that's also what will get you far in any religion that you're in. So many people just follow routinely, and it's actually asking questions and seeking out answers that can really help you develop your relationship with whatever faith you're in and whatever community you're in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You said a lot of very profound and right on target things. Yeah.
Thank you.
As parents, we need to learn how to allow or allow our children to maintain autonomy, to grow into the being that they would like to become. And case in point, I had somebody say to me, they want my daughter to maintain a healthy fear, a level of healthy fear. And I'm like,
Right.
tell me more about that. Right. Because I'm not so certain that that's really what you mean. Because if your daughter is out at a party or a gathering or something along those lines, you know, you want her to say, I might try beer tonight. Or you want her to be able to say, everybody here is doing drugs. I'm uncomfortable. Come get me. And any way that turns, you don't want them to feel like, oh, I'm going to get in trouble because I'm here and what everybody else
Mm.
is. And so, I think that, we also, as parents, and I've raised 5 and have 6 grandchildren. So, what we really work on is teaching them how to regulate their own emotions. So if they're really upset about something and they can't calm themselves enough to articulate it, it's, how do we teach you to self-soothe, right? Like go compose yourself, come back and articulate. And so, we do a lot of that work, and it makes a huge amount of difference. And so they are able to, in a social setting with their peers, able to say, like, this makes me uncomfortable. This isn't a conversation I want to have. I don't want to go and do that. Like you guys go and have fun. And they don't have that fear of missing out. They don't have that fear of judgment, et cetera, because it's just, and and you just gotta navigate that space of when there's bullying and teasing. How are they gonna, you have to teach them how to handle that, and it starts at home, and teaching them how to have distress tolerance, emotion regulation, to articulate and to feel safe, saying how they think, feel, and believe about things, and being okay, standing on their own regard. And we have 5 children, and you know spirituality is unique and individual to each and every one of them, just as it is, for myself. And we all get to choose and not judge, right? It's more of a, society's need to operate in a state of acceptance. I call it being in the stance of a learner versus the stance of a judger.
Mm.
We're far too ready, knee jerk, impulsive, whatever, right? Reactive instead of responsive, less curious about, what other people think. And the thing is when the tables turned, you don't like to be judged, you don't like to be told what to think or feel, or you don't like to be told you're wrong. So why is it, you know, why do you think it's okay to do it to somebody else? And so if you think about it, and I bring this one up quite frequently, like when was the last time you judged somebody on the road when you're out driving? And if they turn left in front of you, or if they're going a little slower and you're like, oh, they're on the phone, right? This is
Mhm.
this is a good one for the younger crowd. Get
100%.
off your phone, you're distracted driving, you're going all slow and you get all bent. But hey, when was the last time you were like on your phone, not
Hmm.
knowing where you're going, slowing down, holding up traffic, but yet you're judging other people for it, and you've done the same. You've accidentally turned left in front of somebody before, and right.
Right.
So, we it's like this is our world, and other people
Hmm.
being in it is a nuisance, and instead of accepting the fact that we're all here living on the planet, and we get to choose, right? Like this, my life motto is, this is my life too. It gets to look, feel, be however I want it to. I get to choose, but because that's my motto, I give it to every other being on the planet. Like, you get to choose for yourself. That's great. Right. And if I'm interested, I can say, hey, tell me more about your perspective. If I'm not, I can say, wow, that's really interesting for you, and move on. Either change the topic, or say, I'm not interested in that, but thank you anyway. Right. We could be polite. We could give grace.
Hmm.
We can send blessings. Right. Like, if somebody seems to be struggling on the road, send them a blessing. You don't know what's going on in their life. It's none of your business. It's a split second. Just keep going.
100%. It reminds me of actually one of the women I was romantically involved with. Her dating profile said, "Mind you, this is my life." And I thought that was pretty neat. But as far as the drive, what I do gotta say, just because we're on topic, y- I have seen this very much recently, which is people having their phone, right where the steering wheel is, and they're actively on TikTok while driving. Y'all gotta stop that. That is so dangerous. Pardon me. Like,
Well, that's an
I don't
addiction.
think
That's an
it is.
addiction.
Well, and I'm empathetic to the point that like TikTok has a team of psychologists that are working to actively keep you on the app. And some of them quit because of morality, which is really interesting. It was on the news the other day, but
Mhm.
I think not even at a red light you should be doing it. And to me it's like how far you drive. Most people drive on average, let's say 30 minutes to wherever they're going. You can't go without being on social media or whatever platform for 30 minutes. I think it's really sad what we've come down to, but yeah, it really is sad. And I think it's like going back to talk, like being able to come to your parents or whoever it is, teacher, mentor, during those situations. It kind of reminds me of, I'm not sure if it's in place in every state, if it's a federal law or like a state by state thing, but I know growing up, at least where I grew up, they had it where if someone overdosed and you were doing drugs as well, if you called it in, you did not get in trouble. It was like a Good Samaritan kind of policy. And so I think, having that implemented in your life as a parent, if your kids do get into trouble, being able to come to you with it to prevent further damage is important, to come with that kind of mindset around it for sure. And I think that, it takes a lot for a kid to be able to communicate that with their parents, and anything we can do to make it easier is so important.
Well, kids need
Now,
to know that their mistakes are not moral failings. Right.
mm,
If so, I failed at 12 years old, because guess what? My dad was killed in a sudden accident. There we were at the funeral afterwards, and I'm like, everybody, I'm devastated, and everybody's standing around talking and smiling, and my little brain goes, what's the equation here? Everybody had a beer in their hand and a cigarette. Picked up a six pack, grabbed a pack of cigarettes, took off, grabbed my cousin, took off out back, and guess what? It lightened the load a little bit, right? Like, it
mm,
lightened the emotional load a little bit. So it worked for a minute. So I learned, in some of those big things, traumas, and unfortunately I experienced significant traumas through all of adolescence, right? Like my dad's passing was certainly not all of them, you know, and very important for the younger population, right? Like, so there's sexual assault, there's
mm,
there's lots of things, right? And so if you lean on that for your coping, right? If you go, okay, well, I just don't want to face this, I'm going to numb out with marijuana, I'm going to numb out with alcohol, you're now letting an external situation, right, like the bad act of another person,
mm,
or some tragedy, whatever the trauma is, you're
right.
letting that thing get in here, and you're learning to cope with it with something outside. So you're giving an emotional purpose to alcohol, you're giving an emotional purpose to weed,
Hmm.
you're giving an emotional purpose to whatever it is, ice cream, is one, right? Like a lot of depression. I see a lot of young ladies gathering around, like in a group, like, I just lost my boyfriend. Everybody's gathered around the ice cream. They're going to go get their gallon things and they're going to sit on the
Right,
couch and
right.
do this, right?
100%.
Still a negative coping mechanism, right? Like that ice cream can't help you emotionally. So, and I get it. I had a nice relationship with ice cream also, but we got to take the emotional purpose. So we want to, be able to sit in and say, like, this is a big hard thing for me. I'm emotionally distraught. I want to talk to somebody about that. And so parents listening, right? If you can't allow your child to come to you and say, I just had this big breakup, or guess what? Right? I just sexual assault, right? Inappropriate touching, weird advances. This made me feel uncomfortable. All the things, right? Whatever it is, we've got to feel comfortable going to an adult or somebody, right? Could be a peer, could be anything, right? Just go to somebody and say, I need to figure out how to move through this, not cope through it, right? We need coping skills. Coping skills don't equal alcohol, marijuana, ice
Mm,
cream, right? Like that's a bubble bath. A bubble bath is not a coping skill, right? That's it. It's great. It's relaxing. It's soothing, but it's not a coping skill. So we don't want to cope in life. We're meant to experience it.
right. You can have all this
I could
movement.
get on a whole. I could do a whole sermon on that
Hmm.
one, right?
For sure. You can have process, externally, but no internal process, you've gone nowhere. I mean, I would say coping is almost like jogging in place when you're trying to get to a destination, right? It looks like you're moving, but you're not actually moving at all. And I think the issue for me, it's so ironic. I've done a lot of episodes on addiction, from caffeine to pornographic content to alcohol to sugar is a huge one,
Yep.
emotional eating. And what's so interesting to me is one of the goals of every person is to be independent, to have freedom, right? And how do they pursue that? Through sovereignty over their life. And I think what's interesting with that is people crave that socially, financially, in all these aspects, yet physically they will allow themselves to get dependent on a substance to the point that in worst case scenarios with alcoholism, they can't go to the store without drinking first. They can't leave the house without drinking. They can't even wake up and get out of bed without drinking. And it's so interesting to me, ironically so, that we are all seeking independence to do what we want, to have the money, the freedom, the knowledge to do what we want. Yet some of us will get dependent on these substances, and coffee is such a big one. That episode blew my mind.
I was just going to say coffee.
Coffee was a huge one. I did a whole episode just recently on caffeine addiction, and it's become so normalized. Coffee was I can't explain why it was created, but general purpose was, hey, I'm working a double shift and I need an energy boost. But now it's become a glamorized, popularized, normalized drink. There are more, I won't say the name brand, there are more coffee shops of particular franchises in a town than there are sometimes churches, grocery stores, stuff. You could have a block with three coffee shops, every gas station, I mean, there are very few roads in America you could go and be like, I want a coffee, and they say we don't have that here, you know.
Right.
And it's also, of course, energy drinks have a whole new take on it, and being in the military, I saw firsthand the, hey, who can drink more energy drinks and still have their kidneys work competitions. It's, oh, I had 3 pots of coffee today, beat my
Dangerous.
record. It's very
Mm-hmm.
interesting, the psychology behind what we brag about. Oh, I only slept 2 hours. Well, I never sleep. I don't even sleep. It's a competition. But what I want to kind of focus and turn toward is we talked a little bit about your childhood, those experiences you had. And nowadays, you mentioned working as an emotional performance strategist as well as, an emotional agility architect. And what kind of led you into that? How did you end up in this field? Because, I don't want to sound cliche, but I assume you didn't wake up one morning, you're like, I'm going to be, the emotional leader guru person, like,
No, no, and I'll tell you, right? Like, so I kind of touched a little bit on my trauma drinking years, right? Like adolescence, a little bit into young adulthood, but and the journey with anorexia and the different things. And now, then I became a parent, and I got, I was married, my husband and I have combined 5 children, and life is good, right? I'm still a low level daily drinker, and it was the way I was raised, right? Just was, right? Like, so it wasn't trauma drinking, it wasn't high levels of intoxication. Sure, when we were on vacation or whatever. But here's and I'll just skip forward to it, right? So this is what happened. And so I had a hysterectomy, and when I was just before I was 30. And so hormonally, my physical body changed. So around 35, about 5 years later, I developed generalized anxiety disorder. Okay. And so I was having anxiety and I didn't really understand it. So I was talking to my nurse practitioner about it. Now, mind you, during a chunk of period of time right before that, our oldest daughter had leukemia. My husband was doing a lot of international business, was gone a lot, and just kids, and some of them were starting to move out and go off to college, and things like that. So it was just a lot of moving parts. I developed generalized anxiety disorder. My nurse practitioner, who knew I was a daily drinker, right? I had my Coors Light every day, and she prescribed me Xanax. And I wasn't looking to party it up. I wasn't looking for the big mind altering anything. I was just looking for something to quiet the panic I was feeling in my physical body. So uneducated, I knew, like, you don't take them at the same time, you don't mix them, whatever.
Right.
But so long story short, she prescribed me Xanax for daily use over the
Okay.
course of a 5-year period of time.
Right.
So scientifically, the synergistic effects of the alcohol on board daily and the Xanax on board daily created a physiological addiction where I became that person that couldn't not drink. I wasn't walking around like a drunk. I was maintenance drinking, right? Because I just couldn't not. And so there was that, right? Like, so it was just, I couldn't not have my Xanax in the morning, and I couldn't not, have a small amount of alcohol, and to keep it at a steady pace where I wasn't feeling like I was gonna crash. And so at night I started to feel like, oh my gosh, right? Like I can feel my liver working. I, just really felt respiratory issues and things like that. So I was like, sat down, had a conversation with my husband, because he's like, why now? Right. I'm like, because I feel like I can't not. Feel like when I tried to not, like, I feel like it's physically dangerous. And so I went to detox, checked in sober, right? They found that very interesting. Like, they didn't believe me. They actually thought their breathalyzer was broken. I guess not too many people in the world check into detox
Right.
sober. But I needed that level of watchful eye. I was, in my early 40s, and had history of hypertension, and etc. Right. So I was making the smart decision, be monitored medically, did the whole detox, and then tried did the 30-day, standardized treatment, because I'm like, I got to learn how to open the refrigerator door. Right. So I did the
Right.
standardized treatment, and then still was like, oh, guess what? I still have to go home. Right. Like, back to that. So I got really passionate about it. I wasn't, AA wasn't necessarily something that I was interested in. I had done that court mandated a couple of times in my 20s,
Mm.
early 20s. And so, I knew what it was about, knew it was a safe place to belly up, but it wasn't that wasn't going to be what was going to, change my life. So I went to school and started studying the physiological effects of drugs and alcohol in the body, and got extremely interested. And it kind of was on from there. And I just studied everything about process, behavioral, and chemical addiction, theories, methods, modalities, you name it, over about a 5.5-year period of time. And while I was doing that, I was going, wow, look, this theory, right? Like the locus of control theory. How can I make that serve me in my life? So long story short, I, started creating a, what was serving me in my life, skill sets, tools, tactics, right? And oh man, life got real easy, right? Emotionally, it got real easy. I'm German, Irish, Scottish, Sicilian, Taurus, born on the cusp of Gemini, right? Like, I see red, I can dig my heels in, and I can get scrappy with the best of them. So I didn't like that. I just didn't like that feeling. So I wanted to be like a softer, kinder, gentler. I wanted to feel at peace,
Mm.
and I wanted to be able to, give a lot of grace. And so I changed my life. And so, when I was interning, getting those hours, those clinical hours you have to get when you're, going into practice. And so I started sharing it with the clients that were in the treatment program that I was in. And, we were doing it in group facilitation. And I started doing some deeper work one-on-one. And, luckily I was at facilities that gave me the autonomy, right, to utilize this. And then I, wrote a few programs for a couple places, and did my time. And I worked at, again, I worked in a few facilities, and then went off on my own, right? And so started, because where I was really interested was the treatment transition to life. It was that space after, so that you can learn, recovery life skills, and learn how to, that now what's next. And so that's where I got started. And it's really just evolved over time to where, I have clients that, there's no chemical substance. In fact, most of my clients don't have chemical dependence anymore. They may have, emotional purposes that they've assigned to their wine, or emotional purposes they've assigned to the bucket of Ben and Jerry's, or the Amazon shopping cart, or social media, or the people pleasing perfectionisms, things like that. And so, we're all just there to learn, just to continually advance that level of emotional intelligence, but how to translate that in each person's life. So anyway, that's kind of the journey in a short, right? Because 13 years is a long time to put
Right.
in an hour.
Right. No, for sure. I understand that. And can you kind of just give us a little breakdown of what you're doing nowadays, what your life looks like, and kind of who should work with you based on what you do?
Absolutely. So again, that what I do today, it's a little complex, right? So I do have, we do have that focus, that I have my insight and impact total emotional performance focus group. Boom. We do that every month, right? It's a new focus topic. We get together every week for an hour and a half on Mondays. Boom. We do that. 2026 has already been created, and it's going to be off the
Awesome.
charts. But anyway, so there's that. And so in there, that's where we work on that emotional performance, the emotional agility in real time, in real life. This next year, we're folding in psychonutrition. So I can teach people how to actually hear what their body is saying, and to articulate the performance they're getting from their physical body. So that's going to be really awesome. I have, elite private clients, folks that would prefer to do a little bit more of that intimate one-on-one work, depending
Right.
upon what's going on in their life. Again, people pleasing, codependency, perfectionism, an attachment to alcohol. But a lot of them are coming, they're coming out of a treatment type situation, and are really just looking to kind of get their solid foundation. Some are coming home from a mental health, treatment program, and again, it's that safe landing, that soft landing, where somebody can help them like make sense of, because when you come home, it feels very surreal. So there's that. I also am a mentor for interns. So I do have interns from one of the local colleges that come to learn how to be a good practitioner. I also work with professionals, high level professionals, for that, because it's just different, right? Like when you need to have that level of emotional agility in practice, like in business. And it helps, because then you get to leave your business at home, and it doesn't infiltrate your life, and you're
Right.
not negatively impacting your family. And other than that, you know what, I'm an educator at heart. And so I do teach for the Addictions Academy. I'm one of their elite master instructors. I teach 6 different courses for them, and
Wow.
that can all be found on my website. And in fact, in a couple of weeks, I'm teaching trauma coaching, so that we can, have trauma informed coaches out there that are actually, sitting in people's lives and help them
Right.
navigate. I think that's about it, right? Like that's what I have going on right now.
Right.
Um,
30,000 foot overview.
yeah, that's just kind of the overview of the platforms getting a little bit of a facelift. So things are always kind of changing right now, and everybody's like, ah, where to go? But that's the way of the world, right?
100%. And, we've touched upon a lot of different subjects in a variety of topics, but love, as we close out here, what is the one big takeaway you want everyone to have in relation to emotions?
Mm, you get to choose.
Mm,
You get to choose. If you don't like the way emotionally you're experiencing anything, like you get to choose. You just need to learn how to choose, how to restructure, reframe, and shift in the direction that you would prefer. And it's just not it's not a mindset thing. And I have to say this, right? Like I love mindset work. Don't get me wrong, but it is so much more than that, right? It's so much more than we touched on the body, right? And the connection with it. 9 out of 10 signals go from your body to your mind, not the other way around. And so mindset's a good thing to have, but that mindset needs to be in learning, what do I need to do to actually shift this? And it's a practice. So you've conditioned yourself over 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years of how you are experiencing living, right? Like you've worked hard to get where you are, and now this is like a conditioned way of being. I hear it all the time. That's just how I am. That's who I am. If they would only change, then I'd be fine. I hear that
mm,
all the time. So you've just said, this is my narrow lane. I can't be any different because that's just who I am. And I'm here to
right.
tell you it's not. It's not who you are, right? It's how you've conditioned yourself to be. And if it's
Mhm.
not satisfying you, if you don't feel at peace, if you're not walking around the world with grace in your heart, it can change.
I really like that, the idea that sometimes our justifications to ourselves are just limiting beliefs and we don't recognize it as that. So that's really important
Amen.
to see that. And again, questions and knowledge are one thing, the implementation and application of that is another. So don't just know and ask, but actually do. And so this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your time today, and I hope this was insightful to everyone. We're going to have your website and description below for people to check out. Again, you have so many different things going on, so I encourage everyone go take a look a little bit deeper and see in more detail what you can find for you or for someone you know. And so again, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Blessings.